Many of you have been sleeping soundly, ignorant to the fact that history is unfolding right in front of our eyes right now. In front of us, we are graced with the most beautiful gaming disaster we've ever seen.
Now,
somewhere out
I get
there
it,
right now,
game launches are tough, but Payday 3 earns the title for the worst game launch of 2023. And it's not
Gamer
really
highlighting
a
how
hard bar
one
to
of
beat.
the
Actually,
Steam
it is a
reviews
pretty
called
hard bar
it
to beat.
probably
There's been
one
some
of the
pretty
worst
naughty launches this year.
of all time,
But what
and the
makes
Steam
this one
reviews
so bad?
reflect that.
Well,
The fact that it's at
this video
20%
clip you're
makes
watching
it
is
one
an
of
hour
the worst
and
to review games on Steam currently. They highlight how some reviews call this game totally unplayable right now. You can imagine getting a server, players cannot spawn, so it is straight up the worst.
Video game launches haven't been very good these past few years. It seems every month or so there seems to be a new game that comes out only to be described as having the worst launch ever. We've all heard the stories about the disastrous launches of games like Fallout 76, Cyberpunk 2077, Battlefield 2042, and Star Wars Battlefront's Classic Collection, just to name a few. And while these people's opinions are certainly correct about these games and their terrible launches, they, for the most part, are all the same. Launches ruined because of bugs, glitches, and crashes that resulted in backlash from their respective communities. But these issues usually get fixed in months to follow. Usually. In this video, I want to go over some lesser known launches that resulted in failure. Video game launches that resulted in lawsuits, arrests, deaths of franchises, and even people getting injured. These are some awful video game launches that you might not know about.
For the wolf to survive, it's got to chew off its own leg. Fire! Negative, don't do it! Now, Wrecker, shoot out the window! That's an order! Don't you fucking do it, Wrecker! Save yourselves. Get out of here. Get out of here! Fucking bullshit, man, you hear me? Shoot out the window, you...
Okay, I know what you're thinking. This is a video about launches we don't know about and you start off with one of the most well-known. Yes, the launch of Battlefield 4 is well-known. But I'm including it in this video not because it isn't known, but because of the precedents that came from its launch. After the success of Battlefield 3 that released in 2011, a sequel to it was inevitable. So enters Battlefield 4, announced in early 2013, releasing later that year with an update to the Frostbite engine. It promised to be bigger and better than what Battlefield 3 ever was. But not only was it releasing with an updated engine, that same year was also the release of the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One. The introduction to the 8th generation of video game consoles, and Battlefield 4 was going to be available for them day one on their respective release dates. The hype for this game was huge, and people couldn't wait, not just for a new Battlefield, but for a new Battlefield on a new console. The game came out later that year, and the launch was less than perfect, with the game being riddled with bugs and glitches.
Slid across the ground on his face.
Recorded and yep, it just cut out.
Then go talk to people and go.
I'm gonna ask, hey, did your guys' sound just cut out?
Now, the Battlefield series is no stranger to bugs and glitches. Remember the beta for Battlefield 3? But something like this is not going to ruin the game. If anything, it's just funny. No, the issues for Battlefield 4 were much worse. Game-breaking bugs, game-breaking glitches, and some people even had their save files corrupted, and the crashes were aplenty.
Are you fucking serious? This shit is unacceptable!
Now, I know what you're thinking. What's the big fucking deal?
What's the big fucking deal?
Bugs, glitches, crashes, that just sounds like any other AAA game release in the last 10 years. Well, the thing is, this was the first widely publicized time that a launch like this had happened. It might not seem like it today, but AAA gaming had a much higher standard back then. AAA gaming back then meant having the best graphics, the best gameplay, and the best multiplayer experience. It's what everyone expected at the time, and usually what they got, but not this time. And the fact that these issues happened to Battlefield, one of the most popular franchises, meant a great uproar from players. Millions of people bought Battlefield 4, and hardly anyone could play it without the game crashing, and millions of people were not happy.
Fix this shit! Now!
Not only were the fans not happy, but the game's investors were not happy as well. Because of Battlefield 4's terrible launch, their developers EA and DICE were sued by their own investors due to the game's poor launch, believing that they defrauded their own investors with false advertising, resulting in not one, but 3 lawsuits against the company. The bugs were so bad that EA halted all development on future games until they fixed Battlefield 4. They issued an apology to players and promised that something like this would never happen again in the Battlefield series.
Horrible!
As I mentioned earlier, this game set the precedent of the AAA gaming industry, bugs, apologies, and all. But if I could play devil's advocate, EA and DICE did fix this game, and it continues to be played even to this day over 10 years later. They didn't abandon it like other games. But something like Battlefield 4's launch shouldn't have happened. All the pieces were there for this to be the perfect launch. A new entry to an established franchise with an updated engine, all to be released on new consoles. What was supposed to be the introduction to an industry golden age was instead the introduction to the industry standard.
Sean here up at Zipper Interactive, where we're having a look at SOCOM 4 for the PlayStation 3. I've got Travis Steiner here, lead game designer on the project. Travis, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
The first few weeks of a game's launch are the most important. If the game releases in a complete state, then people will stick around for a long time. If not, they'll leave and move on to something else. But if a game is terrible at launch and gets fixed later on with patches and updates, sometimes people will come back, just like Battlefield 4 and No Man's Sky, for example. But most of the time, that doesn't happen. Take, for example, SOCOM 4 US Navy SEALs, the 10th entry to the SOCOM series. Now, if you don't know about the SOCOM series, let me bring you up to speed. SOCOM US Navy SEALs was a tactical third-person shooter exclusive to the PlayStation. The series was developed by Zipper Interactive all the way back in 2002 for the PlayStation 2, and was a pioneer for the PlayStation's early online features. It gained success over the years and had many sequels on the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation Portable. But then, in 2008, Zipper Interactive brought the series over to the PlayStation 3 with the newest entry, SOCOM US Navy SEALs Confrontation. It was not well received, for having technical issues and missing features from previous games. But it got a resurgence later, and sold well enough to get a sequel. That sequel was SOCOM 4, announced in early 2010, and Zipper Interactive wanted to fix all the issues left from Confrontation, return the features that were missing, and add new features to the game as well. These new features included things like new graphics and a single-player campaign. Of course, being known for being one of the earliest PlayStation games to introduce online play, Zipper Interactive wanted to expand upon that and have majority of the new features based around multiplayer, such as an online co-op mode and new game modes in multiplayer. This was supposed to be the big comeback for the SOCOM series, and it was going to be released the following year in April 2011. The game released that month, and it was alright. It got decent reviews, and many SOCOM fans were pleased with it, but there was a problem with the game. Remember how Zipper Interactive put a lot into this game's multiplayer features? Well, no one could play multiplayer or play online co-op with their friends. So let me guess, it released with a bunch of game-breaking bugs and glitches, right? Well, no. There were no bugs, there were no glitches with this game, but still, no one could play online. So what was the problem? Well, the problem with SOCOM 4 was not how the game was launched, but when it was launched. As I mentioned earlier, this PlayStation exclusive was released in the month of April 2011. Now, if you're a longtime PlayStation user, this month might sound familiar to you. Why? Because that was the month of the PlayStation Network hack.
Now
called one of the largest digital data breaches in history.
Personal information of millions of customers is now in the hands of hackers,
exposing the personal information of up to 77 million users worldwide.
And they got a lot of information, personal information, passwords, addresses, things like that.
Customers are being warned they may have to cancel their credit cards.
So you trusted Sony with your information.
Sony screwed you guys.
All day, whenever I've been turned on my PS3, I've been getting this error that I can't sign into PSN.
The electronics giant says it shut down the service.
Sony blames the shutdown on what it calls an external intrusion, and they've taken the network offline for an indefinite period of time.
Yeah, the PlayStation Network's been down since like Wednesday.
The network has been down for more than a week.
The network has been offline for about a month.
Please, man, I'm hacked into it. Please bring it back online.
誠に申し訳ございませんでした。
Between the dates of April 17th and April 19th, PlayStation was hacked by a group known as Anonymous, and their users' private information was compromised. 77 million PlayStation users had their email address, home address, date of birth, password, and credit card information exposed to hackers. To this day, it still remains one of the biggest data breaches that the world has ever seen. To prevent more data from being exposed, PlayStation deactivated their servers on April 20th until they could fix the problems. For over 3 weeks, PlayStation users couldn't log into their accounts, couldn't stream on their PlayStations, couldn't access the store, and they couldn't play multiplayer.
You can't connect to your friends online, you can't chat with them, you can't download DLC, you can't play any of your multiplayer-enabled games online.
And SOCOM 4, a game that was marketed based on its multiplayer, was released 1 day before the servers were deactivated. You could still play the game, however, but you could only play its single-player campaign. PlayStation would eventually fix the problem, and service would return the following month, but by then the damage had already been done to SOCOM 4. Hardly anyone was playing it, and many players had moved on. Zipper Interactive would release some DLC for the game later that year, but even that wasn't enough to bring people back. SOCOM 4 didn't have a good start, and sadly, things only got worse. Less than a year later, in March 2012, Zipper Interactive was shut down by Sony due to, quote, resource alignment. But the servers for SOCOM 4 remained online until January 2014, when they too were shut down, and the SOCOM series has been dead since then. It's sad too, because SOCOM 4's terrible launch was different from others. It wasn't ruined by bugs, it wasn't ruined by glitches, and it wasn't ruined by corporate meddling. It was ruined by a cyber attack that no one saw coming. Speaking of game launches that were ruined by hackers, Steam is a platform that needs no introduction. Even if you're a console gamer or a phone-addicted child, you know what Steam is and the impact that it's had on gaming as a whole. It's hard to imagine the gaming industry without it, but for a while, that time did exist. Steam was released by their developer Valve on September 12, 2003, and when it first launched, it was not well received. Valve was not prepared for the influx of players on release, resulting in game crashes, bugs, and some people couldn't even get into Steam because of the amount of players trying to log in. Valve's co-founder Gabe Newell saw this coming, and he and his team did their best to prepare, but it wasn't enough. Backlash against Steam in its early days was big, but Valve would eventually fix the server issues and make it up to players by releasing 2 new games. These 2 games were Counter-Strike Condition Zero and the eagerly awaited sequel, Half-Life 2. Both of them launching on Steam just a few weeks after its launch. Well, they would have been, except both of them got delayed. Counter-Strike Condition Zero was delayed due to it being completely remade by a different developer and was released in March the following year, and Half-Life 2 was supposed to come out in late September 2003, but was delayed for over a year. So what happened? Well, the thing that you need to understand is that Half-Life was a big deal back then. The first game was released back in 1998, and it revolutionized PC gaming for its controls, gameplay, storytelling, and graphics, and gained a big following as a result. So when the sequel was announced, many fans were excited. One of them was a young man from Germany by the name of Axel Gembe. Axel is a huge fan of Half-Life and has a lot of interest in the sequel, but he also has a lot of interest in hacking. At a young age, he taught himself about computer hacking and would go on to develop many skills as a result. Now he wants to use those skills to stick his nose where it doesn't belong to find more information about the upcoming Half-Life 2. And that's exactly what he did. Axel hacked into Valve's network to find more information about Half-Life 2. In his own words, the first entry was easy. In fact, it happened by accident, because Valve at the time didn't put a firewall on a particular server for their internal network. At first, Axel found what he wanted: design documents, notes about Half-Life 2, all the while Valve had no idea that their network had been compromised. On September 19, 2003, seeing as how he hadn't been caught yet, Axel decided to stick his nose further into where it didn't belong until he found the source code for Half-Life 2. Axel had found something greater than what he was looking for originally. He downloaded the source code for himself, and now he had an unfinished version of the game that he couldn't play. He had made off with Valve's greatest treasure, and Valve had no idea that he did it. It was a great accomplishment for Axel, an accomplishment that he couldn't keep to himself. Shortly after stealing Half-Life 2's source code, he decided to share his findings with a friend of his. Axel showed his friend the source code, and then in early October, his friend shared the source code on the internet. The secret was out. Valve had been hacked, Half-Life 2 was leaked, and no one knew who did it. The reaction from the community was negative. People were upset at the look of the game, despite the fact that it wasn't finished yet. Remember when GTA 6 got leaked in 2022? The backlash from the community was similar to that. Anyway, but not only was the community upset, Gabe Newell and his team at Valve were also upset. They had spent almost 5 years and millions of dollars developing this game, and the unfinished build had just been leaked online. Some people at Valve even thought that this would have been the end for the company. In early October, Gabe Newell went online to ask the community for help to find the hacker responsible, and would later get the FBI involved, but to no avail. Months went by as Newell and his team picked up the pieces, until February 15, 2004, when Axel sent Gabe Newell an email personally. He told Newell that he was the hacker who got into their servers and stole the source code. They exchanged emails for a few weeks until Axel told Gabe, "Hey Gaben, listen, I'm a big fan of you and Valve's work. I was just wondering if it's possible if I could... Is it possible if I could get a job with you guys? I clearly have skills, and, you know, I came clean with my actions. Could you forgive me and please give me a job? Please?" To his shock, Gabe Newell actually said,
"Yes, I do."
Axel had come clean and confessed to his crime, and now he was about to get a job at his favorite game studio, and all he had to do was prepare for his upcoming interview. Of course, he wasn't really getting a job at Valve. In actuality, Gabe Newell was working with the FBI from earlier, and was using the email exchanges to find Axel. They tracked him down to his home in Germany, passed the information on him over to the German police, and on May 7th, 2004, Axel woke up that morning to find himself surrounded by officers with guns, and then they... Okay, no, that's not what happened. No, he was arrested on the spot, and he put up no fight at all. The Half-Life 2 source code leaker had finally been caught. Axel's actions delayed the launch of Half-Life 2 for months, and cost Valve over $250 million in damages. But work on Half-Life 2 continued, despite all the setbacks, and would be launched the following year. So, what happened to Axel Gembe, Half-Life 2, and Valve? Well, Axel was compliant with the police, and confessed to everything. He was charged with breaking into Valve's network and stealing their source code, but wasn't charged with leaking the source code because that was committed by his unnamed friend. Because of his confession, he was given a lenient sentencing of just 2 years probation. Afterwards, he managed to complete an apprenticeship and would later get a job managing security systems for Windows applications and a job in server administration. He did try to find work in the game industry, but nobody wanted to work with him due to the damages he caused to Valve. Half-Life 2 would be released on November 16, 2004, over a year after it was supposed to, and was met with praise from critics and audiences alike, and would go on to win numerous Game of the Year awards, as well as being classified as one of the greatest games of all time. As for Valve and Steam, they're doing okay, for better or worse.
I'm Dave Newell.
First I stole to survive. Then I survived to steal. It is all I know and all I will ever know.
So we've talked about launch days ruined due to bugs, glitches, and hackers, but now I want to tell you some stories about ruined launches that were too short to have their own segment, so I compiled them into one. But each one of these stories have one thing in common, and that one thing is theft. Let's go back to 2011, with the release of one of the most anticipated sequels of that year. Nope, not that game. Nope, not that game. And no, not that game. This game. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, the highly anticipated ending to the Modern Warfare trilogy before it got that reboot. People couldn't wait for this game to come out, but some people in the town of Créteil, France, just south of Paris, decided that they didn't want to wait. On the morning of November 7th, 2011, just one day before the game's release, 2 masked men held up a truck transporting copies of Modern Warfare 3. Armed with knives and tear gas, they held up the driver and stole over 6,000 copies of the game from the truck, getting away with over 400,000 euros of merchandise. Let's move forward to early 2016 and the release of the game Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. It was supposed to be released on May 10th of that year, but some people in the UK got the game earlier than usual. A few weeks prior, copies of Uncharted 4 began showing up on eBay 2 weeks before the game was supposed to come out. Somehow, the games were stolen in transit. The exact number of copies stolen has never been disclosed, but estimates were as high as 10,000 copies being stolen in transit. Let's go back to 2013 in the city of Windsor, Ontario, where a small independent game store by the name of The Game MD is about to open for business on November 5th, 2013. The owner enters the store that morning only to find the place has been trashed and over $75,000 of merchandise has been stolen from the night before. The thieves entered the store that night by cutting a giant hole through the store's concrete wall. They then destroyed the surveillance system and made off with the goods. And what was so valuable that the thieves just had to steal it? It was consoles, gift cards, and 150 copies of Call of Duty Ghosts. Out of all the games that came out in 2013, why would you steal Call of Duty Ghosts? Anyway, let's look at a more recent event of games getting stolen. In late August 2023, game studio Bethesda is about to release their new sci-fi RPG, Starfield. It was going to be Bethesda's biggest game of that year, being released on September 6th. But one man by the name of Darren Harris in Tennessee somehow got copies of the game a few weeks early. Just like Axel Gembe from earlier, he just couldn't keep the game to himself and decided to share it with everyone on the internet. On August 22nd, 2023, he leaked 40 minutes of gameplay onto his YouTube channel and other social media websites. Bethesda and their parent company ZeniMax quickly caught wind of this and took down the videos on Darren's YouTube channel. But they were too late as the videos began to quickly spread across the internet. Darren then took to his social media, showing off more of his stolen copies, and then he decided to distribute them on Mercury for hundreds of dollars, and even posted videos of himself shipping the stolen games to buyers. 2 days later, on August 24th, he was finally found and arrested, and was charged with felony counts of theft of property, but was later released on $10,000 bail.
No offense, man. That's a good game.
But it's not just video games that get stolen all the time. video game consoles have also had their fair share of thefts. Let's go back further to November 2005 and the release of the brand new console, the Xbox 360. It was a great console to have. I assume. I never had an Xbox 360, but it must have been good because some people were willing to rob others for one. On November 21st, 2005, in Stafford, Virginia, an armed man entered an electronics boutique that morning.
Whoa, hey guys.
And held up the store's manager at gunpoint. He forced the manager to surrender not one, but 2 Xbox 360s, and then the thief made his escape with stolen goods in hand, but was apprehended not long afterwards.
Thank you for your cooperation.
Copy that.
A few days later, a mother in Jonesboro, Georgia, was on her way home with a brand new Xbox 360 in hand. She had spent 9 hours that day waiting in line at Best Buy just to get this console so she could give it to her son as a Christmas gift. But on the way home, she was also robbed at gunpoint for her Xbox by someone who followed her home from Best Buy. The mother gave chase to the thief, but the thief was too fast, and sadly, he got away. Speaking of Xboxes getting stolen before Christmas, let's go up north to Anchorage, Alaska. A small group of 5 friends have each gotten their own Xbox 360. Lucky them, because no one else in the area can get their hands on one. But these friends don't want to play their Xbox 360s. Instead, they want to sell the sold-out consoles to the public at an inflated price. Yes, these guys are scalpers. They had spent that night trying to sell the consoles to people waiting in line, but no one would buy. After many failed attempts at making a quick buck, they called it a night and went to a nearby McDonald's to eat. 4 of the 5 friends went inside to get food, and one of them stays back to look over the merchandise. Meanwhile, 2 men have been watching these guys and their failed attempts to make a quick buck and wanted to show them how to do it properly. The 2 men went up to the one friend watching the merchandise, stuck a gun in his face, and stole 4 of the 5 Xbox 360s. The scalpers were robbed at gunpoint.
That's hilarious.
But the Xbox isn't the only console with ridiculous launch stories. Let's go forward a year to November 2006 and the release of the new console, the PlayStation 3. A console that I did have, and I will say, out of nostalgia, it was the greatest console ever. But it didn't start off that way. In fact, the PS3 had a very rough start, with strange advertisements, awkward press conferences,
Genji 2 is an action game which is based on Japanese history. So here's this giant enemy crab.
and a price of $600. To put that into perspective, that was more than the Xbox 360, more than the Wii, and more than Apple's first generation iPhone. But not only was the price ridiculous, some of the stories at launch are also ridiculous. Such as this story in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, where a crowd of 200 PS3 buyers got so out of control that the police had to use pepper spray in order to get them to calm down. Over on the West Coast, a California super Walmart had to be shut down after PS3 customers got too out of control. Then there was another story over in Kentucky, where a huge line of PS3 buyers had to call in the police after they were involved in a drive-by shooting, with 4 people, including a news reporter, getting injured. Luckily, the person who performed the shooting was not firing a real gun, but instead a BB gun, so the injuries were minimal. But just like the Xbox 360, the PlayStation 3 also had their fair share of thefts as well. But the thefts against PS3 buyers were a lot different, because many thieves were not stealing customers' PS3s, they were stealing customers' money. As mentioned earlier, these consoles cost between $400 to $600 at launch, and this is back in 2006, when people still used cash for most purchases. That means that every PS3 buyer in these lines has roughly $400 to $600 in cash in their pockets. Some thieves saw dollar signs in their eyes and went out to rob these customers. In Springfield, 3 men were camping out in front of a store to be the first ones to buy a PS3, when 2 armed men wearing masks showed up, led them behind the store, and stole each of their wallets at gunpoint. Then there was another crazy story in Connecticut, where 2 armed men confronted a line of people waiting for PS3s and demanded money from all of them. One of these people in line, a man by the name of Michael Pencala, refused to give the armed men his money, and for his refusal, he was smacked in the face with a sawed-off shotgun and beaten to the ground. While getting beaten, Michael managed to reach for his cell phone and quickly dialed for 911. He told the armed men that the police were on the way, and the armed men fled the scene. But as they were fleeing, one of the armed men turned back to Michael, took aim with his gun, and shot him before making their escape. Luckily, the two armed men were found and arrested not long afterward, and Michael was taken to the hospital where he made a full recovery.
Thank you for your attention. Now it's time to explore your inner realm. Open your brain and look inside. Prepare to enter the theater of the eye.
For our last story of awful launch days, we need to go way back to the late 1980s and talk about one of the biggest game companies to come from Japan. Many of you probably know SEGA as the creators of the Sonic franchise, but back in the late 80s and early 90s, they were one of the biggest game companies in the world, and even one of Nintendo's biggest competitors. In 1988, they released their newest game console, the Sega Genesis, and it was a huge success. It didn't beat out Nintendo's SNES, but it was enough of a success for them to make another console. That console was the SEGA Saturn.
SEGA Saturn. Aww, hit it! Sega's next-generation gaming platform, revolutionary sports and arcade gameplay, all with amazing new 3D experiences never before possible on home game systems. Wow.
Their new console for the 5th generation of gaming, set to be released in late 1994. Sega was already ahead of their rival Nintendo, which hadn't even announced the release date of their upcoming console, the Nintendo 64. Sega was going to be releasing one of the first new consoles for the 5th generation of gaming with no one to challenge them. But there was a new competitor in the gaming market. A new competitor that, just like Sega, also came from Japan. Sony had seen the potential in the gaming market, and they decided that they wanted in by developing their own gaming system. That system was the PlayStation. And just like Sega, their new console was also going to be released in late 1994. Sony and PlayStation had a lot going for them. They were using technology that was more powerful than the Saturn, they had acquired many third-party developers, and it was cheaper. But not by much. But despite all that, they didn't have the name recognition in the gaming market like Sega did. Sega launched the Saturn in Japan just 2 weeks before the PlayStation, and just in time for Christmas. It worked for Sega because they managed to beat Sony in each other's home country. Sega might have beat Sony over in Japan, but now it was time for each other to bring their consoles overseas to America. Whoever could win in America would certainly win the 5th generation of gaming. Sega didn't seem to worry at first. Some people in America were paying up to $800 just to have the Saturn shipped in early from Japan. Both consoles were going to be released in America around the same time in September 1995, but Sega of Japan's president, Hayao Nakayama, sorry if I said that name wrong, wanted to release the Saturn much earlier than the PlayStation. On May 11, 1995, at E3 of that year, Sega went on stage to announce the new launch of the Sega Saturn in America. They said, the Sega Saturn is not launching in September, the Sega Saturn is being launched today. That's right, they launched the system 4 months early in America.
And since I began my remarks with an announcement, I may as well finish with another. We started our rollout of Sega Saturn yesterday.
And Sega fans were more excited than ever as they quickly went out to get their new console. But this is where things go very wrong. The idea of launching the Saturn early does make sense on Sega's part. It had already shown success in Japan and had a high demand in America, but while the demand was high, the supply was low. Very low. Many American retailers were not aware of the Saturn's surprise launch. Some of the biggest retailers like Best Buy, Walmart, and Circuit City weren't even given consoles. Consoles were only given out to retailers like Toys R Us, Babbage's, Electronics Boutique, and Software Etc. in very, very low quantities. But if you were one of the lucky few to get a SEGA Saturn, you could just go home and play some games on it, right? Wrong. There were hardly any games for it during the surprise launch. Developers were expecting to have their games done by September to coincide with Saturn's initial launch. Because of the surprise launch, a lot of these games weren't even finished yet. Because of the surprise launch, the Saturn released with only 6 games. Majority of them were just ports of arcade games. While all of this was happening, Sony announced the release of the PlayStation for September 9th, 1995. Not only that, but at E3 earlier that year, they announced the price of the PlayStation.
$299.
$100 less than the Saturn. The PlayStation released later that year and sold out the SEGA Saturn. It sold more units in 2 days than the Saturn did in 5 months. And the PlayStation continued to outsell the Saturn until it was discontinued in 1998. At the end of its lifespan, the Saturn sold over 9 million units. The Nintendo 64, released 2 years later, sold over 32 million units, and the PlayStation sold a whopping 102 million units. Sega did have a good idea though. Releasing a new piece of technology before your competitor is exactly what you want to do in business. Except, the Sega Saturn was already going to be released before the PlayStation by a week. Releasing the system months ahead of time when developers, retailers, and customers weren't ready was just a really dumb business decision. A business decision that cost Sega greatly, as the Saturn crashed and burned at launch before it could even make it to orbit. Anyway, that's it for this video. I don't usually make outros like this, but I just want to say thanks for watching. If you want to see more videos about gaming, then check out this video about the PlayStation 2 Strangest Myth, or if you want to see something else, check out this video about the YouTuber who shot the president. Thanks for watching, please like and share, and I'll see you next time.